The NBA Combine numbers are in. Been looking forward to this for a long time. We've had a week to look at them. What do they mean for the Utah Jazz? Let's talk about it.
Jazz Smack, NBA and Utah Jazz basketball.
So after mulling these numbers over the past week, after they finally were posted, looking at all the data that is collected at the pre-draft combine, I always look forward to this. This is one of those, regardless of how little or much it impacts the Jazz, it's always interesting to look at this data and kind of in relate it to not only the to kind of look at how one player in this draft compares to another player in this draft, but look at it historically and look how these players compared to some of the past players, some of the players who are really good in the NBA. What do their numbers look like compared to how these guys tested out? I mean, it's always really interesting, and look at these numbers like. There's always rumors about how big somebody is or how good of an athlete somebody is. Like, take Gordon Hayward, for instance. Gordon Hayward, when he was at Butler, there were guys announcing those games that would say something like, "Oh, he's 6'10". Well, in my opinion, I never thought that Gordon Hayward looked 6'10". And when he measured out at the pre-draft combine, he measured out at 6'6" 3/4. So he's under 6'7". I never thought he was 6'10". I never thought he was 6'9". Gordon had decent size at 6'6" 3/4. There's nothing wrong with that for playing the 2-3 position, but he was not 6'10". So it's always nice when we actually have concrete proof about how big somebody is, how well they jump, etc. And that's what is nice about having all these guys participate in these measurements. Now, all the players who are playing in the NBA there's some guys that just never did get tested. And some of the top prospects each year sit out and they don't participate. So there's always that. But again, all we can do is look at the numbers that are there, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at these likely top 4 of the top picks, and I think the Jazz pick will be one of 3 guys. I think the Jazz will either end up with Dybantsa, Peterson, or Wilson. At the start of training camp next year, I anticipate one of those 3 guys being on the Utah Jazz roster. We'll see which one it is. But let's look at 4 guys who are in the top. We're going to look at those 3 guys, plus we're also going to look at Cameron Boozer because, well, Carlos is a scout for the Utah Jazz. Cameron Boozer, we have an immense amount of information, so we are certainly going to look at him as well, considering all the information the Jazz have on him, even though I don't anticipate Cameron ending up with the Jazz to begin next season. So let's take a look at it. So AJ Dybantsa, we're going to look at 4 numbers. We're going to look at height without shoes. We're going to look at standing reach. We're going to look at no step vertical jump, and we're going to look at max vertical jump. So those are the 4 data points that we're going to look at for these 4 players. So AJ Dybantsa, height without shoes, 6'8.5". Really good. His standing reach, 8'10". Really good. No step vertical, 33.5. Very good. 42-inch max vertical. That is spectacular. And anybody who's watched AJ Dybantsa play at BYU, these are the exact numbers you anticipated. He had really good size, really good length. He's very athletic, ultra bouncy, lively legs. I mean, there are no limitations physically, no physical limitations on how good AJ Dybantsa can become as an NBA player. Certainly, he has immense athleticism, awesome numbers. So number 2 on this list, Darryn Peterson. He measured out without shoes at 6'4.5", standing reach 8'7", no step vertical 31.5 inches, max vertical 37.5 inches. Again, This is kind of what he expected looking at him at Kansas, watching him play. You would expect him to have good numbers. He wants to play the one position, the point guard position, 6'4.5" and 8'7" standing reach. Terrific size for that position. I mean, spectacular size, and the vertical jump numbers really good. He's obviously very physically gifted. So, number 3 on this list, and in my opinion, this is the least likely guy that will end up to start the season next year with the Jazz, but Cameron Boozer. So he measured out at 6'8.25" without shoes, standing reach of 9 feet, no step vertical 28.5 inches, max vertical 35 inches. Now, compared to the other 3 guys on this list, Cam, you would expect those vertical jump numbers to be a little less. I mean, he is a much larger guy. He outweighs the next closest person to him in terms of weight is 30 pounds lighter. So Cameron is a much larger person. He has a paint presence on the offensive end, and that's kind of really what he used to his advantage in the college game. So you would expect him to have lower vertical numbers than these other 3 ultra athletic guys. But Cameron Boozer's numbers, I mean, his measurables here are still good. There are no limitations on how good of a basketball player in the NBA Cameron Boozer can become based on these measurables. And the only caveat to that, the only thing I would say is, now Cameron plays really a different brand of basketball than the other 3 guys on this list. Cameron also, I think that the other 3 guys on this list will have an easier time sliding their feet on defense sliding their feet on the perimeter on the defensive end of the court. So, but again, he's playing he has a different body type. He's playing a different brand of basketball, a different type of position. So trying to compare Cameron Boozer to Darryn Peterson on how well he can move his feet on the perimeter, obviously that's unfair. Totally unfair, because Darryn Peterson isn't going to be able to guard anybody in the paint as well as Cameron Boozer can. So again, it's just comparables from one player to the next, of guys who play different positions. It's very difficult. But Cameron Boozer, just watching him at Duke, he's not as ultra athletic as these other 3 guys. I mean, that's plain as day, but he's still plenty good athletically. Number 4 on this list, Caleb Wilson. Now, he measured out without shoes at 6'9.25", standing reach 9 feet, no step vertical 34.5 inches, max vertical 39.5 inches. And again, I mean, anybody who's watched this guy play at North Carolina before he was injured, athleticism, off the charts athleticism, great size. I mean, physically, he's as good as you could ever hope to get. And certainly there are no limitations on how good he can become based on what his measurables were. So terrific athlete. But I mean, we look at all this data, and realistically still, the most important thing, more so than anything, is, does the guy know how to play basketball? Does the guy know how to play basketball? So that's always the most important. You just come back to that, because there have been plenty of guys who've had immense impact in the NBA, immense positive impact, who would not measure out with all these different tests that they do now at the combine, who would not measure out well in the current, grouping of tests. I could give up an example. Somebody like Steve Nash. Now, Steve Nash, if you were to give him all these, I mean, Steve Nash had decent size as a point guard. He's like 6'3". At least that's what he was listed. I don't know if he was ever officially measured, but in terms of the vertical jump and everything, he's not going to test out particularly well. He'll be okay, but he's not going to be particularly good. But Steve struggled always on the defensive end. He was never a plus defender. That just wasn't one of his. It was not in his wheelhouse to ever be a plus defender. But his impact on the offensive end, it was immense. And quite frankly, I think his ability to elevate the play of his teammates, even though he did not have spectacular athleticism. His ability to elevate the play of his teammates was as good as I've ever seen, and certainly as good as I've ever seen in college. He was terrific, and he was terrific in the NBA. Obviously, he was voted MVP twice. I mean, awesome player. So it's these measurements are not everything. They're certainly not everything. They're fun to look at, they're meaningful, but they are not everything. So there was one number of all these guys that were tested and everything that really stood out to me that I wanted to, and this doesn't really impact the Jazz because it's very unlikely that this player will be with the Jazz, at least not next year. Maybe it's sometime in the future, but next year, very unlikely. That player is Mara, the center for the University of Michigan. Now, he played at UCLA. He transferred to Michigan this past season. He played for Dusty May there. Michigan won the national title, went through the NCAA tournament, ended up winning the title. Mara was a big piece of that, a considerable piece of that. His presence in the paint, his length was impressive. I knew he was long, but I had no idea he was this long. Mara measured out height without shoes at 7'3" and a standing reach of 9'9". 9'9" is the second highest standing reach ever recorded at the pre-draft combine. Taco Fall was number one at 10 foot 2.5 inches, but 9'9" is immense. I mean, Rudy measured out at 9'7", and at the time Rudy measured out, that was one of the highest standing reaches that had ever been tested at the combine. So 9'9" is crazy number. And quite frankly, I think that Mara is a decent prospect. I mean, Taco Fall was not the most athletic guy in the world, and he certainly wasn't really gifted in terms of coordination or skill or anything like that. And Mara is certainly better than that. He's better than that in terms of his athleticism, and he's certainly better than that in terms of his skill. I mean, he showed that he has a hook shot and everything when he was at Michigan this past season. So I think Mara has a shot at carving himself out a role in the. How good will he be? It's too early to tell, but I think he can certainly carve out a role for himself. Considering that length, he can carve out a role for himself in the NBA and stick in the NBA for years to come. Can he be really good, being a really positive impact player who plays a lot of minutes? I don't know. That's yet to be seen. But that length is really unique. That's a very unique measurable by Mara. I mean, you look at like somebody like Sean Bradley, he measured out 7'6" without shoes and 9'6" standing reach. So 3 inches less than Mara. Now, Bradley was measured long ago. He's been obviously out of the league now, and we all know his problems with being struck by unfortunately his tragic being paralyzed by being struck by a car while he's riding a bicycle, and it's awful, and we wish Sean the best. But the 9'6" standing reach for somebody who's 7'6", that's surprising. I was shocked to see that number. I would think that Sean would have a higher standing reach than someone like Rudy, who measured out at 7'1" and 9'7" standing reach, or even somebody like Porzingis, who measured out at 9'6.25" standing reach. But again, that 9'9", crazy number. Unbelievable. Another person to point out on this list of the top 10 ever drafted in the company is Mo Bamba. And Mo Bamba played for the Jazz this past season. He measured out with 7 foot with no shoes and a 9'7.5" standing reach. So even a half inch more than Rudy. But Mo Bamba's, he wasn't, at least at this point, he hasn't been able to carve himself out a meaningful role in the NBA. He's been able to stick around, but he played mostly with the G League this past season for the Jazz franchise. So again, not really, he hasn't found himself in the niche yet to be able to be a really positive impact player and get meaningful minutes in the NBA. So these length numbers don't mean anything, but 9'9" is still impressive. So I wanted to bring up that. And that brings us to one other thing about the Jazz. Now, We all know the Utah Jazz need to improve defensively. For them to actually be a true competitor for a title, the Jazz have to be much better defensively. I think everybody knows that. Everybody understands that. That's why there was so much emphasis in this past training camp to be placed on the defensive end. And they said that's pretty much all they worked on. The players are saying that through training camp. All they did was work on defense. So let's look at the numbers for the Utah Jazz over the past 4 seasons under Will Hardy in terms of the NBA.com's defensive ratings for team defense. So we're going to look where the Jazz finished out of the 30 teams each season, starting with Will Hardy's first year and ending with this year. So those four numbers. In the 22-23 season, the Utah Jazz finished 23rd in defensive rating, according to NBA.com numbers. In the 23-24 season, they finished 30th out of 30 teams. In the 24-25 season, they finished 30th out of 30 teams. And then this season, they finished 29th out of 30 teams, the Wizards being the team that finished below them. So we know that the Jazz need to improve a lot on the defensive side of the ball. They have to, if they want to truly compete for a title, they need to improve defensively. Are they going to make a huge jump this season and push for a top 5 finish? I doubt it. But I think they need to try and push for a top 10 finish in defensive rating. And if they don't make that big of a jump, I would actually be disappointed. And I think the Jazz should, I think Jazz management, the Ainges, Zanuck, and Ryan Smith should look at it and evaluate it at the end of next season if they don't make a huge jump. Because if you want to truly compete, you got to make a big jump. But I think there is hope. There's hope for the Jazz making a big jump because there is another team that was kind of in the Jazz situation who did make a big jump this season in defensive rating. And that team is the San Antonio Spurs. The San Antonio Spurs, over the last 4 seasons, in the 22-23 season, they finished 30th in defensive rating, according to NBA.com numbers. In the 23-24 season, they finished 22nd. In the 24-25 season, they finished 25th. But then, in this season, the San Antonio Spurs jumped up in defensive rating to third. That is an incredible jump. And that's the type of thing we need to see from the Jazz. Are Jazz going to get in the top 5? I don't think they're going to get in the top 5 defensively. But they need to certainly push for the top 10. Because if they want to be considered some sort of a true competitor somewhere over the next few seasons, they've got to get a lot better defensively. And yes, getting Walker back is going to help immensely. Walker's one of the best defensive presences in the NBA in the paint. He has demonstrated that. He tracks shots. He tracks shots on the defensive end really well. He's terrific. I mean, Walker, I'm a big fan of Walker Kessler, and I hope that he's back with the Jazz next season. And the Jazz also have Jackson, who's also another good defender. But the Jazz have to, as a team, they have to make a jump. And the San Antonio Spurs proved that you can make a jump. But the thing that San Antonio has is they have that one very unique defensive guy, the guy who is one of the most unique guys the NBA has ever seen, and that guy's Victor Wembanyama. His presence in the paint is unlike anybody else I've ever seen on an NBA court. His length is just spectacular. His ability to deter shots and deter guys from even attempting shots is, quite frankly, unlike anything I've ever seen. Rudy was really good defensively in the paint, but he didn't have the impact of Wemby. And San Antonio also picked up another terrific perimeter defender in Stephon Castle. He was awesome at UConn. I was a big fan of his because I thought that he could have a really big impact, both passing the ball at his position as a 2-guard and also on the defensive side. And he has certainly displayed that in this playoffs. And over the time that he's spent time he spent in the NBA since being drafted. He's really good defensively. So the Spurs have those two guys who are terrific at their positions defensively, and then they could kind of fill around them, and they were able to make a huge leap. And the Jazz need to be in this situation. They're not going to get into top 5 like the Spurs did. I don't believe that that's a capability that the Jazz will have next year with next year's roster. But that's what they need to shoot for. They need to shoot for a big, big leap defensively. We'll see if it happens. It'll be interesting to watch because that's going to tell us a lot about how good this team can actually be, is how much they improve defensively next season. So those are my thoughts. And that's what I saw looking at all the numbers and giving some consideration to, all this data that comes in from the combine and everything, and trying to just kind of mull it and think about it over a week. And that's kind of what the conclusion that I came to, that, all that data looks really good. There are going to certainly be no physical limitations by anybody that the Jazz do draft given the number 2 pick, and let's assume they actually just stay at number 2 and don't trade out of that pick, don't trade up to number 1 to pick Dybantsa, assuming the Wizards do take Dybantsa, and they don't trade down to go down a spot or 2 and take Wilson, because I think that would be the other guy that's in the mix of the guys that they do draft. But the numbers look good, and the numbers have looked really good. So certainly no limitations there. We'll see what happens. But anyway, I think we're going to call it quits for this edition of Jazz Smack, and we will talk to everybody later.